off the pitch, Gascoigne didn't leave fish in your car, Brian, or any other items in your clothing. He let you off okay, did he?
I think he tried to, but he never managed to do that. No, but Gaza was one of the most generous people I've ever met, and I think Coisty would say the same thing. I think as a person, as a player, he was phenomenal. Yeah. We loved everything about Paul Gascoigne. You never knew what to expect when you came in the mornings, right? I mean, it was hilarious at times, but what a player he was, and the only thing I do regret that he wasn't there longer than he was, because I think he played some of the best football of his career at Rangers.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, Brian. I think I often say to folk, talking about Paul Gascoigne, I actually think we get the best of him at Rangers in many ways. I know he was fantastic, Newcastle and Spurs, and he got the injury, Lazio, but I just felt he was really happy at our place, particularly away from. He was always at home. Where Gascoigne was at home was on the football pitch or on the training ground. But when he was away from there, I think the Scottish folk loved him. He could go and do his fishing. He could go and he liked to do the outdoor thing as well. And I think he was very comfortable with that. And I think it helped him kind of relax. And I genuinely believe I think we get the best of him in terms of his career. I know, having spoken to him, I did an interview with him, Brian, for an hour, maybe about 3 weeks ago, just at the start of the Euros, and I had to interview him for an hour, and I had about 3 or 4 pages of script that I was supposed to stick to, and needless to say, I think I get 2 questions about it, and he was just away, and he was telling stories about this, that, and the next thing. But having said that, it was great to see him. He looked really, really well, and he sounded in top form. So no, it was great. It was great to catch up with him, like it is with yourself.
It's interesting. Brian mentioned Gascoigne's generosity there, because Ali, you go into YouTube and there's about 1,000 videos of you telling 1,000 amazing stories about Paul Gascoigne, but there was just one which kind of made me think, God, there was such a sweet-natured side to him. You can tell the story, obviously, but I think you were talking about maybe getting a present for your 4-year-old. You were saying to someone else, Gaza wasn't even in the conversation, about maybe a rabbit.
It's so true, Joe, and I think it sums Gascoigne up, really. He wasn't involved in the conversation at all in the dressing room. In fact, I think I was talking to Vigilante at the time, Brian, and I just said to him, it was Alexander, my youngest son's, my oldest son, my only son at that time. I think he just turned 3. I said we're going to get his birthday present coming up. I said, we're thinking of getting him a rabbit. He quite fancies a rabbit. And it was just a kind of throwaway line to Durante. And then the very next day, I got up in the morning, and as I got up in the morning, I could just see a kind of pair of legs disappear over the back of my garden wall. Now, the Brian will tell you, I lived in the next village to Gascoigne. When Gascoigne stayed at Rangers, he lived in the next village to me, which was about 3.5 miles away, which I can reliably inform you was not enough distance for any man to be living next to Gascoigne. Anyway, as I see this shape go over the wall, down into the garden, and I couldn't believe what I saw. In the garden, there was a goldfish bowl with 2 lovely goldfish in it, and there was all the food to look after the goldfish and instructions and how often they should get fed. Next to that, there was a magnificent budgie's cage with a blue budgie and a green budgie. Again, all the food and the instructions and how you feed them. And then next to that could only be described as the Buckingham Palace of rabbits' hutches. This thing was magnificent, Louders, it really was. And inside it was the most beautiful white bunny rabbit, right? And just on top of the hutch was a card that said, to Alexander, hope you have a lovely birthday, lots of love, Gaza, and a big kiss on it. And I thought, that just sums him up, it's just absolutely amazing. It's just so thoughtful. As I say, Joe, he wasn't even involved in the conversation, and he just heard it, and that's what he did. It's amazing.
Well, I think it's great to hear that. I mean, obviously you spoke to him a few weeks back, that he's in a good place
Yeah.
I think we all hope that they will stay like that, because what a wonderful character he is, what a wonderful human being he is.
Absolutely.
He will be okay.
We were talking about Paul Gascoigne in a separate piece with Brian Laudrup, and you were both sharing some lovely stories about him. Interestingly, so you have his jersey from that '96 game.
I do, and it's another story, Joe, that just sums Gascoigne up. You know, incredible, because I'd said to him, I'd just my first young boy. I think he was a wee fella. He was only a baby at the time. And I think Stuart McCall was the same, and he promised both of us his jersey from the game. So I know he's promised Stuart. Stuart knows he's promised me. We're not bothered at all, you know, because we know what Paul's like. We're just thinking, you know, he'll do something. He'll find a way. But you know, we're not that bothered. Anyway, I'm going down the tunnel at half time. It's nothing each in this Scotland-England game. So you can imagine, Joe, there's bedlam, absolute bedlam going about. It was the old Wembley, down the tunnel at half time. And Gascoigne runs by me. And he runs towards the Scottish dressing room and he shouts to Stuart, Stuart! Now this is taking place at half time, and he's on his way to his own dressing room. Stuart turns round, he takes off his jersey, throws it to Stuart, and says, tell Coisty he can have a win in the second half. Wow. You know what I mean? And it's amazing. I mean, the guys, we're halfway through one of the most important matches in our career, all of our careers, and he's thinking about other people, and it just kind of sums him up. And absolutely, I do have a lovely photograph, Joe, taking it just right at the end of the game, where we're kind of embracing each other, we're handing over each other's jersey, and I just said to him, what a goal, we'll be watching that for years to come, and I just wish you all the best. And that was it. And to be honest, they probably should have won it that year.
Yeah. God, that's amazing, that halftime story. Because even I know Alan Green on 5 Live at that very moment was saying how poor Gascoigne had played in the first half. So he would have been within his rights to be distracted. That's amazing. And I know I read you said that, so he returns to a Rangers dressing room, obviously, for the following season. He'd be within his rights to walk in and say, boys, what about that goal every 5 minutes? But it was almost the opposite. Yeah.
He didn't mention it. We actually forced it. It was a funny story. Weeks and weeks later, for a laugh, we tried to recreate it in the dressing room. As you do, a rolled up pair of socks. But genuinely, when he came in, you know, he never mentioned it, Joe. And I've got my own theory on that. I'm not saying it's right, but I've got a feeling about it, and I feel quite strongly about it. I think even Gascoigne was... Now, I'm loath to use the word embarrassed, right? I don't think he was embarrassed, but I think he was certainly conscious of the fact that the goal was one of extreme quality, you know, that we would watch again. Well, there you are. I mean, 25 years later, whatever it may be, it's constantly been on the television, and rightly so. So I think he was conscious of it, so much so he didn't mention it to us in terms of giving us a little bit of stick. Whereas I honestly believe if for example, Alan Shearer had hit one and it hit the post and come back and Gascoigne had tapped it in from 2 yards, I think there's every chance he might have made a life a complete misery for his remainder of his period at Rangers. But I just think he was conscious, as I say, not embarrassed, but conscious of the quality of the goal. And even he thought, well, no, I better just leave this alone a wee bit. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was amazing, really.
That's interesting. As in, it would almost be somewhat boastful for him to mention it. It was that great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he never did. He never did. Mind you, I've got to say, we were privy to him scoring some quite unbelievable goals, and I really mean unbelievable goals in his period at Rangers. The one obviously against ourselves at Wembley was a mark of genius, and as I say correctly, gets shown on a regular basis. But believe me, Joe, he scored some frightening goals for us, you know, up in Scotland for Rangers. Amazing.
I can only imagine. I mean, it must have been a privilege to see some of them. And you were saying in that chat with Brian, by the way, not to turn this all into a Paul Gascoigne chat, although he has a habit of almost
He does, doesn't he?
grabbing the moment a bit, doesn't he? But you were saying maybe that could have been the best football of his career. He was happy and at home, and obviously very pally with yourself and others, and maybe you got the best out of him then.
I really believe it. I genuinely believe it. I mean, he is, along with Brian, one of the most talented players I've ever played with and ever saw and trained with every day. But there was a happiness about him away. Paul Gascoigne was always at his happiest, Joe, when he had a ball at his feet, you know, when he was on the training ground or on the football park. But I could sense a real happiness in his life outside, away from it, which I'm not sure he always had, whether it was in Italy or in North East England or London. Because up here, you know, it can be manic, as you know, with Rangers and Celtic. It can be very focused and crazy at times. But there are lots of places you can escape to, particularly if you enjoy fishing and enjoy the country, which Paul did. So, I mean, many's the time he would genuinely, he'd be up at, I don't know, crack of dawn, 5 in the morning, and there was a little loch, maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes from his house, in the village, next village to me. And away he would go, and he'd fish for 3 hours before training. He'd come in, do his training. And another thing you might be aware of, Joe, he was an absolute beast of a trainer. Oh, dear me. I mean, he worked as hard as anybody I've ever trained with, whether it was in the gymnasium or whether it was hitting free kicks or whether it was taking penalties or whether it was just running. He worked incredibly hard. He would get his work done and then he'd be away again. As I say, and he loved his life up here. He would go fishing. Everybody loved him. There was always a seat at anybody's dinner table, whether it was their own dinner table, myself, or whether it was the manager, Walter Smith, or even Brian's, or Ian Durrant's. You know, he was always 100% welcome. And everybody loved him, particularly the kids. Everybody absolutely loved him. But he was a real hard-working, talented player.